please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Some changes are proposed to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Since this is being done by an ordinance, till it is approved, as a matter of propriety, we don't give the details.
Why you brought in an ordinance? Because you're called a session of Parliament. That's why you can explain to us that.
You see, it's the whole process is at an advanced stage, and therefore you want the process to go on a correct track. That's the reason.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Indianomics. As you just heard, the Cabinet has given the green signal for amendments to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code through an ordinance. The ordinance has been sent to the President for his assent, and we will have the details of the ordinance after the presidential assent. But so far, sources tell CNBC TV 18 that willful defaulters and those convicted of fraud and siphoning of funds will be barred from participating in the resolution process. These are just some of the changes to the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code through the ordinance. How will this impact lenders, promoters and resolution participants, the buyers? What else can we expect from this ordinance? Joining us on the show to discuss in detail how the ordinance changes life are VG Kannan, the Chief Executive of the Indian Banks Association and former Managing Director of the State Bank of India, Bahram Vakil, Founder Partner of AZB and Partners, and Seshagiri Rao, Joint Managing Director and Group CFO, JSW Steel. Well, absolutely best of breed to discuss this. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Mr. Kannan, I want to directly draw your attention to this statement which we have. I mean, this is source-based, but we have reason to believe that this is unimpeachable, that the people who will be barred in section 5(3), I'm just reading it in detail, insertion of a new section 29A to make a person ineligible to be a resolution applicant if he is an undischarged insolvent or has been declared willful defaulter, comma, whose account is classified as NPA by RBI for a period of 1 year or more, or who has indulged in preferential transaction, undervalued transaction or fraudulent transaction, or disqualified to be director under the Companies Act 2013. Now, does this mean that it is a willful defaulter whose account is classified as NPA, or is it a separate category whose account is classified as NPA? How are you reading this?
I would say all the accounts which are NPAs and only are the ones which are likely to be made into willful defaulter. So by default, a willful defaulter will be an account which is already an NPA. So it's actually a combination is what my interpretation is, that it will be a willful defaulter whose account has already been an NPA and declared by the RBI, either acknowledged or declared and advised to the banks to take up the necessary action.
But should we read it at all as all those who are classified as NPA cannot be applicants?
I would actually say it must be together, because otherwise it will almost mean that no other person can actually do it, in which case most of the accounts which go to NCLT would be ones which will be an NPA for 1 year, and in which case none of the promoters will be eligible to buy, and which may not be very fair.
Okay. Bahram, I have tried to type out what we found. If it is indeed the way I read it, do you also agree with Mr. Kannan that it doesn't mean everybody who is an NPA for 1 year cannot come back and buy their assets? Or is it a willful defaulter who is declared as an NPA? How should we understand it?
No, I completely agree that you have to read that together from the text that I have seen, and I guess, as the finance minister said, we need to wait for the final version, but the comma should be read as an and. So it would be willful defaulter and has been declared NPA by the RBI for more than 1 year.
Okay. Well, now let me come back to Mr. Kannan. Mr. Kannan, if with these qualifications, we have the amendment saying that those who have been declared willful defaulter, found guilty of having a history of siphoning funds, convicted of offence related to fraud, any breach of duty to the company while submitting a resolution plan. Now, given all this, what is your sense? Do promoters still stand a chance?
It's very clear that they are only identifying the people who are either committed a fraud or a willful defaulter, or who have siphoned off funds or appear to have siphoned off funds on the basis of the transaction or a forensic audit. So in case there is very clear evidence that no such thing has happened, I think existing promoters can also be eligible to do it. However, how the COC or the Committee of Creditors values the proposals from the various promoters has to be seen as to what kind of weightage that they are going to give to this, because a total blanket ban on existing promoters who may have defaulted for reasons beyond their control may not be the right thing. And I think the particular ordinance is providing for genuine defaulters to also maybe come back. Let's see how it pans out.
Okay, so your reading is that only fraudulent siphoning, or in a sense people are in a way having a criminal activity
malified
involved.
Intentions.
Malified intentions are only disallowed.
Could be.
Okay, Mr. Seshagiri Rao, I know you don't have the advantage of having this paper in front of us. It's just sourced information, but unimpeachable sources. From the adjectives that I have read out, what is the sense you are getting? That is just the dice loaded against promoters, or is it completely denying promoters a chance?
No, I have not seen the ordinance, but
Yes.
Initial comments based on what you have described. I think all the promoters should be barred in participating in the resolution plan. I don't think that is the spirit, because as Mr. Kannan rightly pointed out, if the financial distress is on account of external reasons, I don't think it should be too harsh against all the promoters that they cannot participate. But it is right that the promoters who have defaulted willfully, or who are non-cooperative borrowers, or who have some fraud or forensic audit is against them, those definitely should not be allowed to come and participate in the resolution plan.
Okay. Bahram, would you say that once you put these kinds of adjectives, it is quite possible that other buyers, may also find, promoters or some other rival buyers getting some case against them, that in some, obscure case, you were found guilty of probably siphoning funds. People could rake up cases, and even a deserving candidate could be pulled out of the race. You think this can be misused?
Well, I guess it's possible, but I think it's not too likely. I mean, the criteria that I've read so far is quite straightforward and explicit.
Okay.
So I think it's a small chance, but not a really.
All right. Okay, then we will leave it at that. Do you think these are check boxes? After all, banks declare who are willful defaulters. It is very clear who the RBI calls non-cooperative, and the forensic audit will clearly put out whether there is a siphoning of funds. So there is no discretion involved. Are the clauses which are in this document fairly clear, no room for discretion? Bahram?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that it's very clear, and as you said, most of them are well defined, but it is a little premature because we are reading a draft after all.
Yes. Yes, and we are reading sourced information. Now let me come to how it feels when you are part of the Committee of Creditors. How does life change after this ordinance, after this amendment ordinance, Mr. Kannan?
In the existing IBC, I think there is no clear-cut indication that such people will be barred. IBB had earlier said that you should conduct a forensic audit and ensure this, but it did not specifically bar the people. It's an understanding that these people may be prohibited from doing it, but this sort of gives you a sanctity and gives you a law that you don't need to encourage such proposals from such people. So in a way, it's more or less putting the official stamp on the thinking of the COC, saying that anyone who has committed a fraud, etc., should not be involved.
Okay.
I think it's actually more an enabler, and it will certainly ensure that no cases can come against the banks for not having encouraged that, because it is not specifically prohibited. Okay. Now it is being specifically prohibited. ensures this is happening.
Okay, now let me tell you what sources have told us about the intent of the government. The intent of the government is that promoters who have, who they see as guilty of not paying back the banks for such a long time and creating such a big hole should not be preferred by the bankers. The fear on the part of the government is that if the promoter asks for a haircut of say 45% and an external buyer asks for a 55% haircut, as a commercial banker you will like to prefer the one who is asking for a lower haircut. Does this amendment change your discretion in any way?
And thinking always will be, as a commercial banker, the least haircut. But having said so, I think the COCs will look into the way the money is actually coming, whether it's substantially is coming by way of upfront payment, earlier payment, all those things will be factored in. And that then they will take a call as to whether there's 45% haircut or 55% haircut.
No, but this one, there are further clauses which I did not read out. It says the ordinance also explicitly provides for the committee of creditors to consider viability of a resolution plan and provide for further requirements to be specified by the IBBI in this regard. And we know that the IBBI has said that the committee of creditors should consider the viability of the plan, and they don't want the asset to come back to the NCLT as a stressed asset again. So does this cast a onerous responsibility on the creditor to rather give someone who does not have a record of NPA, even if he is asking for a higher haircut?
See, I think, it's very easy to say that even if a person is asking for a higher haircut, it should be given to him mainly because he doesn't have a track record
of dissent.
Because we'll have to also understand that the existing promoter who possibly is asking for a lower haircut also has full knowledge about it. And why should he be barred? In case there's a huge difference between it, then I will take a call. But in case the difference is marginal, probably the COC will look into the aspect that in the past he has not met his obligations, and that could be taken.
So
but
if it is a narrow difference in haircut, you will prefer the outsider.
Yes.
But if the promoter gives you a much better deal, even with this ordinance, you will prefer the guy who is giving you a much lower haircut.
Much lower haircut, one. Second thing, it's not only a question of haircut. It's a question of what is the term period. If someone says, I will give you a lesser haircut but repayment over 15 years. Another person says, I will give you a slightly higher haircut but repayment over 10 years. The discounting factor, etc. will come. Because anything beyond 5 years, there's a lot of uncertainty. If someone postpones his repayment in such a way that it's going to come much later, I think that discounting factor will play and ensure that this will also be looked into.
Okay. Well, we need to take a break, gentlemen. But I want to ask the lawyer and the potential buyer, how would they rather design changes to the IBC for quick and clean resolution of stressed assets? In this edition of Indianomics, we are discussing the ordinance that is going to amend the bankruptcy code and probably make it certain that willful defaulters and those who are guilty of running down a company are not allowed to bid back for stressed assets. There are also other criteria that the committee of creditors should consider. They should look at a resolution plan in such a way that the viability of the asset is ensured after the resolution. So that brings an element of subjectivity. Actually, in this context, let me read a tweet by Mr. Sajjan Jindal, chairman of the JSW Group. He had tweeted on November 8th as follows: the dubious promoters should not be allowed to submit a rehabilitation plan so that the misuse of the IBC is prevented. And again, more recently in a tweet, Mr. Jindal explained what he meant by dubious promoters. He said, and I quote to be more specific, dubious promoters, willful, non-cooperative defaulters should not be considered in insolvency and bankruptcy process. He also said that a strong monetary mechanism with right to recompense may be put in place for promoters who are not dubious to participate in the IBC process. And Sajjan Jindal added that it will be a setback to the credibility of the IBC process if existing promoters reacquire the asset with a haircut and without any right to recompense to the banks. What would you say to that, Mr. Kannan? Do you think if the existing promoter is given back with a haircut, a right to recompense should be inserted?
Say in case the existing promoter had to have the same right to recompense to the bankers, I think there's no need for having NCLT, because it's almost like saying that whatever shortfall I will pay at the later date. The very fact that a particular project is not in a position to go ahead with the existing level of debt and that a haircut is required is acceptable to everyone. So I think this concept of right of recompense would actually ensure that, you know, he is in no way going to be changed from the existing SDR, S4, etc., where this right of recompense is already there, into in IBC, where it's going to be a clean break from the past.
Okay. All right. So a right to recompense is not something that makes sense in all cases, is your point. Mr. Rao, as a buyer, how would you like the IBC to be amended? Not just in terms of weighting pro and against a promoter, but other amendments that you would like to see in the Act?
No, there are three things I think which are required to be done as regards to IBC. One is who will be the resolution applicant. I think that clarification has already been issued or amendment has been done 7th November 2017.
Yes.
And also now this ordinance together, resolution applicant will put to rest. Then how these bids which will come, they are credible, realistic and viable. If somebody has to establish that a committee of creditors, what is the uniform bidding criteria or evaluation criteria, I think has to be done. In some cases we have seen that this criteria has been stipulated at the time of submission of the bid. In other cases it is not there.
Okay.
Hopefully if the bidding evaluation criteria is specified in the beginning itself, reducing the discretion that is given, one person will get priority or anything for any reason whatsoever, which will be subjective, can be again contested in the court, which could delay the process.
Okay.
So evaluation criteria before the bidding is specified uniformly in all the cases, it will be very, very helpful. The third is the objective of IBC eventually through resolution instead of liquidation is to maximize the value to the creditors. If it is the objective, then I think there are certain amendments which are required to be done where the value getting eroded because of lack of amendments to the other acts like income tax or in the case of CB listing requirements or in the case of competition law or in the case of Stamp Act. So I think these require to be relooked to ensure that value to the creditors is maximized. There won't be any additional cost to the prospective investor or prospective bidder.
Okay. Well, let me just clarify. You mean the Income Tax Act needs to be amended or waived to the extent that the haircut is not treated as a profit and it is not taxed. You want the delisting rules of SEBI not to apply if the incumbent, the incoming buyer gets because of debt conversion to equity more than 75% of the stressed asset, and you don't want stamp duty to be paid in these cases, right? These are the three amendments you want.
No, just I wish to elaborate here. Prior to IBC, there was SICA and there is a authority like BIFR. So any scheme approved by BIFR under SICA, it is to enjoy certain specific advantages. Like section 32 of the SICA stipulates that whatever scheme says that has overriding powers under SICA and the other acts, even if it is inconsistent with the respective laws. We thought when IBC was introduced, similar section was there under 238. Therefore, there won't be any problem at all. Even the scheme of IBC can have certain provisions which can override the other provisions. Thereby, it will not be a limiting factor to comply with those conditions under the either Income Tax Act or under SEBI or any other acts. Whereas there is section 30 of the IBC which contradicts section 238. That is why a clarification has been sought from Minister of Corporate Affairs, which they have clarified correctly that there is no problem getting shareholders' approvals for other resolutions in the IBC as a process. So similar clarifications if they are issued, that at IBC also whatever the schemes is approved by NCLT, it has a overriding powers and there won't be any extra burden on the prospective bidder or the target company.
Yeah, point taken. You know, the IBC itself prevails over all other laws, but the resolution under an IBC does not prevail over all other laws at this point in time. Bahram, do you think that this kind of security can be guaranteed to those who are buying stressed assets, that delisting rules don't apply to them, or this tax on write-offs does not apply to them? Do you think this is feasible?
Yes, I think some clarity on these aspects will definitely help the process a lot. And as you know, last week they set up a committee for considering amendments to the Act. And I think I read somewhere that they even said that these amendments will be carried out ASAP, within a few months, knowing how fast we are moving now. So no question that all these will be helpful, and along the way I'm sure further issues may come up as well, and they will be tweaked to make sure that the process is as efficient as possible.
Okay. So your sense is that the requirements which Mr. Rao is raising as a potential buyer, most of these are likely to be sorted out when the committee appointed by the government makes its recommendations. These are not insurmountable problems. Is that your position, Bahram?
Yes, that is my position, because all these issues are well known now and have been very well articulated. In fact, the government also is aware of them. And as I said, that's why these are the things that have to be decided, and the amendments need to be done ASAP.
Okay. Well, last word to you as the banker or the ex-banker. Mr. Kannan, with this kind of an ordinance amending the IBC and possibly, of course, other amendments coming in, do you think bankers will have the comfort to go for the viability of the plan and not their immediate benefit in terms of a haircut?
I think even in the past also, it's always going to be the viability. For various reasons, I think the viability failed. So I don't think that the bankers are going to compromise on the viability there. But these amendments are like what Mr. Bahram and Mr. Rao have been suggesting. Many of them have also been articulated by bankers also. This is a learning process, so you can't expect that IBC or the IBBI regulations are absolutely cast in iron and cannot be changed. I think always, as Mr. Sahu always used to put it, the practices come first and then come the regulations and the rules.